Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Welcome back to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 56. Lead Gen isn't an industry, it's a way of life. Full disclosure, we were supposed to have a guest on the show today who unfortunately had to cancel at the last minute. So we were like trying to pull some ideas about what we're going to discuss, we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about something we literally were discussing this morning, and we just thought, let's just stick a podcast on and record and sort of go through this. And the idea is that lead generation isn't an industry as such, it's a marketing tactic. And Simon, you put a post out on LinkedIn about this, and it's very interesting. I got people just talking, a little bit controversial, maybe annoyed some people. So we thought, let's just clarify this, let's go through and see it, sort of explain what we mean. And also Tim Romer replied to it, who was a guest on the show before, and he put, lead gen is a way of life. And we thought that was a pretty cool response. And he's not actually going any further into that. He just sort of got a good reaction. So we thought,
like the best statements, there's always a degree of ambiguity about them.
Yeah, it was just very kind of decisive, full stop, and then that's it.
Yeah.
So let's start by simply saying what you meant by that. Why is lead generation treated as an industry and not just an aspect of marketing?
Yeah. So to back step slightly on this, so the day before I was actually on a call with I'm just looking at the LinkedIn post now. It's just replied, Luke Ashworth at Advisor AI, and he and I had just agreed to have a conversation to catch up and talk through some thoughts and whatever. And it's something I've mentioned, or we've talked about. We might have even talked about it on the podcast before, that whether lead generation is actually an industry and whether that potentially harms its perception. It's not seen as a marketing tactic. So my big thing has always been saying, right, like lead generation is not an industry, but it gets perceived as an industry and it gets attached to certain verticals behind that. So something could be like financial services. It gets heavily attached to it because a lot of high ticket or relatively high ticket items use a lot of lead generation tactics to obviously get leads in because it boosts their sales. So things like life insurance, mortgage leads, PMI, private medical insurance. So anything related in the financial services, because they can be worth hundreds, thousands of pounds of conversions, and the total addressable market of people within them is huge, because every time someone buys a house, every time someone has kids, every time someone gets ill, potentially, they all trigger these actions where they need financial services. So most people, like in the UK or the US or all over Europe in some way, have financial services, and a lot of that data will have been collected, or their data will have been collected via lead generation. But the actual industry within that is that financial services, and lead generation is just the tactic, the marketing tactic that is used under that industry to enable financial services industry to get more customers. So for a lot of people, lead generation exists as a siloed industry, which is strange, because if you think about it, virtually every company on earth does lead generation. So its most basic concept, it'd be like, a newsletter sign up on a landing page, on a website, which virtually every company has, or it could be even a contact me page.
I remember, it was the guys from CJ who sort of said they would contact people and put, do you lead generation? And they were like, no, we don't do it. And then there's literally screens to the website and say, you've got a form, you are doing it. I think that was kind of, exactly the issue.
Exactly. So once you start thinking of it like this, you think, okay, well, it's not an industry then, right? Sorry.
I'm editing this out just for the record. I'll leave it in.
Sorry, anyone listening, I just stood on the wire attached to my mic. So when you start thinking of it like this, it's not really an industry, because it's something that's just everybody's carrying out. So, does it become an industry when you put a form on your website? Is that an industry? Or is it an industry when you have dedicated companies like Leads.io, like MVF Global, like millions that we all know and interact with, especially, a lot of them license Datable or feed leads in, or the buyers buy leads from them and it feeds into Datable. So we know lots of them. Is outsourced lead generation to those type of companies an industry, or is that still just a marketing tactic that's being outsourced? Because what would you call it if it was being done in-house by the financial services company, for example, or by an energy company or a broadband company? So then it's suddenly its name changed and it becomes something else. It's no longer lead generation. Or does it then become a marketing tactic? So I think this is where the sort of the blurred line is of it being an industry or not. Now, one thing you could question, and I've questioned myself about this, is why does it even matter whether it's an industry or not? Because it's a legitimate question.
Why does it matter?
Yeah, well, who cares? And the reason why I think it matters is that if it becomes a siloed industry in itself, it's almost as if none of the other marketing tactics that could exist around it, as in creating awareness, creating a brand, doing other sorts of advertising, thinking a sort of more holistic sense and a larger sense around marketing, no longer matter if you're existing in that sole industry and literally your whole sort of existence is only given meaning by people's data. But it can't, because to carry out lead generation, you then also need to create awareness, because it's sort of awareness that drives it. It's lead generation is the sort of the money shot, so to speak, or the first money shot before the sale. So in the post that we're talking about that I mentioned today is, might marketing generate better leads when they think of it just as marketing rather than an industry called lead generation, because they have to think in a larger sense? And a lot of this comes back to a statement that we've made a lot, which is lead generators need to become brands. Brands need to become lead generators. And basically using the marketing tactic of lead generation and all the other marketing tactics to help them do that.
There is a danger here. We're getting into kind of the realm of sort of semantics, and I think at the end of this podcast we'll come back and kind of clarify what we're trying to say. But before we do that, let's just be transparent about it. And let me ask you: do you think you might piss some people off by putting this? Not because you meant to, you definitely meant to, but I think because of the confusion between what you were saying. And maybe some people thought, well, almost like you were devaluing the lead generation industry, which you weren't trying to do, and you weren't doing it at all. You were simply kind of, I know what you were saying, that you've spoken about it, it'll make sense, but do you think you might have annoyed people in the lead gen industry?
I don't know if anyone will have thought of it that deeply, but no, I think it's the opposite. I mean, the thing I take from it is it's basically bigger than what you're thinking, because if you silo it as an industry and just put it in like a box, it's, I think that's potentially smaller than saying this is a huge marketing tactic that the biggest companies, every company on earth is using, and you get some companies that are really, really specialized at it as a marketing tactic. And I think this is the point. Lead generation, good lead generation, is really, really, really difficult. It's like incredibly difficult. You are creating customers for people, and you're getting people to raise their hands and say, like, I want to be contacted because I either want to be your customer, or I want you to market to me or advertise to me differently. So I think that it makes it more accessible as a marketing tactic, or an industry, if that's what you want to call it, if you turn it into a marketing tactic. We've spoken before on this podcast, some of the big brands, I don't know, let's say Nike. Why are Nike not outsourcing some of their lead generation? Or why don't we see lead generation being done by huge brands, and why does it get attached to these verticals? And then we talk also about, how difficult sort of marketing in the future, or tracking people, or going on pragmatic exchanges and stuff and doing all the banner advertising that everybody does to drive awareness, and how a lot of that happens within lead generation. And I think some of this is we need to break down these silos that exist, where lead generation gets put into this niche that gets attached to like financial services or to energy or to whatever. And one of the ways to do that is to I think help people understand that it's actually a marketing tactic, like every other marketing tactic out there that exists. So when you're a marketer sat in a brand, it's just like another weapon in your arsenal that you're looking at, and a very big weapon. Let's admit. That can be used, and you're no longer thinking of it as this like specialized thing. And yes, I think it would be helpful for those companies to go out to specialized lead generation companies, because those are the guys that are best at it. Just like, they go out to agencies. So all the big brands will ever talk about, they generally all use big agencies to do stuff, but those big agencies never carry out lead generation. They then have to go to a specialized lead generation company. They might carry out some lead generation, but it's not going to be great. It's, because it's so difficult. It's like, I don't know, it's like doing PPC, you need a specialist to do it. It's like doing SEO, you need a specialist to do it. It's quite difficult to get like a rounded marketing team or a rounded marketer that can like figure out all this stuff by themselves and be an absolute expert in it. So I think that one of the ways we can make lead generation more accessible, help people realize the importance of it, help the companies that are really good and specialized at it, the big lead generation companies. Tim Romer, Leads.io, that we were talking about, whose comment that he's looking at now is lead generation is a way of life. I love that. These huge brands should be working directly with them and outside of the typical lead generation verticals.
Why is it those? I don't know, those, like say, those verticals are really strongly identified with lead generation, but why? There's huge opportunities and not in like all these other brands. Like, why can't lead generators be, I don't know, like you mentioned Nike, like, could that exist, that there were people like selling leads to people who want trainers and shit? Like, I don't know, like, why is it so narrow, I guess, is what I'm trying to.
Well, it's to do with the like CPA, right? So and this then comes down to the intent and the type of marketing that you're getting. So if you're just going to sell a pair of trainers, and the CPA that you're willing to pay out, or sorry, for anyone listening, the cost per acquisition that you will pay someone to get you a customer. So there's two things in this. Sorry. So this is the first one, the CPA. Is it worth it? You've got the lifetime value. Are they generating more customers just by like their brand is so big, and so they don't believe they need lead generation anyway? And the second thing is that a lot of brands want to be hugely in control of their brand. Yeah. So they'd find it really difficult to outsource things, because they, so protective of what's going on, where the message is going to be put out, everything else, which is kind of odd because, they all do pragmatic advertising to drive awareness on like banners and stuff. And I mean, it's just been splashed absolutely everywhere in the furthest, darkest regions of the internet that probably no one would have had any idea about, and that bots have been all over anyway. But I think, again, this comes back to breaking down these silos and removing this association with like specific industries, or lead generation being like a specific industry in itself that's only used by certain brands to do certain things. And one of the ways, sorry, to just reiterate the point, that we almost have to do that is make people realize it's just a marketing tactic, like every other marketing tactic, and you have to have specialists to do it. And whether that's internal or going external doesn't really matter, as long as you're getting it done.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like, just to bring it back around again, this is the whole point, isn't it? We keep talking about this as though it is like you're outsourcing it to a separate industry doing the same thing, but actually it's not. It's just a tactic. There's no reason why brands, whether they're outsourcing or doing it in-house, aren't just doing their own. Like, every other marketing tactics available to them, they're pretty much doing them all. So why not also be doing lead gen too, I guess.
And I think it is this sort of industry thing. It's like, it's strange. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I've been to like shows or talk to people and be like, in this industry, and I have to try and keep catching myself. And the conversation that Luke and I were having yesterday, either he said it or I said it, and that's like prompted me to go, we've got to stop saying this. It's not an industry; it's a marketing tactic. I think what you could call an industry is the companies that do lead generation on behalf of other companies, is almost like it's like an outsourced marketing industry in itself, almost like agencies are an industry, I guess you would call.
Maybe it's both an industry and a tactic then, like because you have like I used to talk about SEO earlier, like SEO I think of as a marketing tactic, and if I went and started working for a big brand, I'd make sure the SEO is right. But similarly, you don't have the same thing with lead gen. But it should be, shouldn't it? Like,
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's bizarre, and the more you think about it, I don't know whether we've really answered the question or clarified the point.
And I think it's really important what you just said, because that is why I would like to see the future like. It's not like I'm, a lead gen fanboy. Like I'm just saying it because we're involved in whatever. Like I'm saying this because this is a sort of marketing tactic that works in B2C. B2B, it can work, it's slightly different, and we all know. But in B2C, how many brands do you know? Let's take the top 100 companies in the UK or in the EU in B2C, and if we could open the door into their marketing team, and then what they outsource to agents and things, we'd go inside into their marketing team, they're all sitting there. So there's 20 people. You'd have guaranteed like a designer. You'd have a CMO for a start, who'd have like a well-rounded marketing base, I would assume. You'd have like top tier designer. You'd have like a couple of PPC guys, SEO, all different people. I can virtually guarantee you wouldn't have a lead gen expert. You might. It's funny because the PPC guy, for example, might then be able to run lead gen, but is he like a master of building landing pages? Does he then understand the conversion metrics outside of then generating a lead and it being attached back to the sales and living and dying by those results? Or is he just filling a database full of data and then going, oh, look, I got 100 leads. I have like no idea what sales came on the back of it.
The weird thing is, these are all to a degree linked with lead gen too. Like if you're doing PPC, if you're doing SEO, you are all.
It's because it's all marketing. That's what I mean. It's just a tactic of the overall marketing scheme, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to work out why we talk about it. It's almost like we're just siloing, say ourselves. Lead generators maybe are almost siloing themselves into this own sort of separate thing. I don't really. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like they're keeping it separate. Like, I don't know why, because it's a huge opportunity for lead generators to then be like, right, I'm going to go like work with whoever. Like, I don't know. It's almost like we have to keep it to this little small. And this is the part. I mean, let's just be transparent about it again. Like, and this is the problem we face with Datavault. Like, this is a conversation we have as we try and work out how we appeal to like the brand side of it too. I don't know. We're going off piece slightly because we're talking in the B2B sense, but it's a similar sort of issue. Like, how do we get brands to want to do lead gen and use Datavault in that way? It's the same problem. I guess we're just having like
I think it sort of comes back to I can't remember if I've mentioned this on the podcast or I said it somewhere else, but so I know that I was talking last week or the week before to another guy who does a similar thing to us, but more B2B related, and we were talking about having to draw a line in the sand. And this, I think this should be another podcast that we potentially do, and it's like this perception of data being big and expensive and what brands want, and then the perception of lead generation, which is like completely different. But this data comes from lead generation, whether you like it or not. Like data doesn't just materialize out of the ether. So all this like data that everyone wants to fill their CRMs with or email lists or whatever, it has to be generated. It can't like happen any other way. And so for something like Datavault, as you mentioned, do we talk about lead generation and what leads to the outcome of this, or do we talk about data, because that's what everyone's referring it to it as, is like what fills your CRM, like them just sending emails out to people. And so it's quite funny actually, because it's something Michael Ferrer talks about. It's about education. So is it really like that? Is it just a massive piece in what all this data comes from, is all lead generation, and whether it's perceived as that or not, that's the marketing tactic that has led to all this data being collected that fills everyone's CRMs, goes in their dialers, whatever happens with it all, they use on their Facebook audience profile to hit. Yeah, I mean, I know the answer, right? It's just it's like a theory. It just seems to make sense to me, because I think lead generation should be thought of as far bigger than it is, and just seen as a marketing tactic, so that it makes it more accessible to like lots of brands in lots of verticals, rather than it seemingly be quite siloed.
I think that is actually maybe how I was just thinking, like how I say wrap up these podcasts, but like, I'd like to try and end on a sort of a take-home message of some sort. And I was like thinking, I don't really know how to do this as we were talking.
I think we just end with the Tim Romer's comment.
It's the way. Well, what I want to say, I think, is the important thing is maybe when you put lead gen as an industry, maybe some people perceive that to bring it down, but actually what you're trying to do is elevate it up. It's not just industry; it's a huge tactic that could be used for more. I think that's kind of how we sort of draw a line under this and say it's not just a small industry; it's a tactic which every brand should be using, every company should be using. So maybe that's how we wrap it up this week.
That's a really good way to wrap it up.
So yeah, we didn't have our guest fell short. We're getting back in next week, hopefully. But in lieu of that, we decided to do a quick podcast on a subject we're talking about, and hopefully people have found it interesting, or at least thought-provoking, if not challenging, and who knows. But yeah, that was episode 56. Lead gen isn't an industry, it's a way of life. Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.